So after a series of tests, I finally have my diagnosis for my vertigo, which I've been suffering from for over 6 months. And it has at times been very debilitating and largely unpredictable. I never know when an attack will happen. And although it lasts just a few seconds, the spinning sensation, it just brings me down to the ground. After a V&G test, a balance test, a hearing test, an MRI, my ear, nose, and throat doctor now knows why I'm suffering. Hi, I'm Nikki, and welcome to La Paz Bound. My husband Don and I and our 5 pets, we're moving from Tampa, Florida to La Paz, Mexico. On this channel, I discuss getting Mexican residency, downsizing and selling our stuff, including my luxury collection of handbags and shoes. And if this type of content interests you, then please consider subscribing to my channel. I started experiencing the sensation that I was spinning, not the room, in December of 2024, and it was the weirdest sensation. I've been dizzy before, and I've even had a fainting spell a couple of years ago, but I've never felt like I was being pulled up from my feet and hung upside down and then spun really fast. And these attacks would come on every 3 weeks or so, but by mid-May, the occurrences were weekly, typically twice a week. I ended up seeing my primary care physician. He did a simple test to determine nystagmus, which is rapid eye movement. He said I had allergies and fluid built up in my ear, and he treated me with nasal spray. After a couple of weeks of no improvement, I then sought the help of an ear, nose, and throat doctor or an ENT. And the first thing the ENT did was remove the impacted wax from both ears, a result of a lifetime of cleaning my ears with Q-tips, which is a big no-no in the ENT world. He then examined my eardrums and my middle ear, which appeared to be fine. The ENT doctor then ordered a V&G test and a balance test. So a V&G test examines the inner ear and it assesses your balance. And my test lasted 90 minutes and it was divided into a series of smaller tests. The first test was a balance test in which I marched in place with my eyes open, my eyes closed. I lunged with my left leg with my eyes open, my eyes closed. And then I stood on a soft gymnastic mat and I faced the wall and closed my eyes. The tech was assessing if I would lean or stumble in either direction. For the remainder of the V&G test, I was seated in a chair in a dimly lit room and I wore goggles throughout the entire test. The next part is where I had to follow a green dot. I had to follow it side to side, up and down, random patterns, just with my eyes, not moving my head. It was the easiest part of the test and the most comfortable. And again, the V&G test is looking for how my eyes respond to stimuli. The next part was rough. The tech covered the goggles so that I would be in complete darkness. He basically inserted a cover into the goggles. He then spun the chair to the right for a minute and then he abruptly stopped the chair. And he told me to keep my eyes open and I thought I was going to hurl. And then he spun it the other way, same amount of time. The spinning part, that wasn't too bad. It was the abrupt stop at the end where the tech was even holding my shoulder to ensure that I stayed in the chair so that he could record my eye movement. The tech then laid the chair back and put headphones on me. He played a series of what sounded like jackhammer noises through the headphones, one ear at a time. And while this was annoying, it didn't hurt and it didn't cause any of the feelings of nausea, but the next part did. Okay, so this next part is called the caloric test. This part was not done in darkness, but I still had to wear the goggles to track my eye movement. Essentially cold and warm air, it's introduced into the ear canal. The cold air in each ear was fine. It was when the warm air was introduced into my left ear that I thought I was going to hurl. Not so much the right ear. I felt a warm sensation in my right ear, but it didn't trigger nausea like the left ear did. I also felt during that jackhammer banging in my ears that my left ear was not hearing as clearly as my right ear. It was more muffled. When I first went to the ENT, an audiologist came in and wanted to do a hearing test, but because I had impacted wax in my ears, she said it needed to be cleaned out first, and then the hearing test would have to be done another day. So a day after the V&G test, I had a hearing test, and it's been years since I've had a hearing test. I went into a soundproof room and would tell the audiologist yes when I started hearing sounds, which were low and then they gradually got higher. I also had to repeat certain words that were spoken through the headphones. And she also put some sensors in my ears to test the various sounds. And then she said both ears were fine. I had no hearing problems whatsoever. So that was good news. So last week I had an MRI. My ENT doctor suggested that I have an MRI because he wanted to rule out any neurological issues. And I've had numerous CAT scans before where you're pushed into that tunnel and you're told to breathe and stop breathing. And it's slightly claustrophobic, but not too bad. I have had an MRI before, but it was of my lower extremities since I suffer from kidney stones, which run on my dad's side. And knock on wood, I haven't had an episode in almost 10 years. However, during my last CAT scan in September, the ER doctor said he saw a kidney stone, which has been sitting there for 10 years. It's just waiting and plotting its passage. I've never been able to pass a kidney stone on my own. They usually result in hospital stays and lots of morphine. Sometimes I'm glad that I YouTube a medical procedure before I go. Oftentimes I'm not, but I'm glad I did before I went into the MRI. I knew that it would be claustrophobic, and I was asked twice on medical forms if I was claustrophobic. I also knew that my best bet in combating this was just to keep my eyes closed during the entire procedure, and I highly recommend that. If you've never had an MRI, especially of your brain, you basically lie down on a table and either earplugs or other ear protection is provided or headphones. I was informed that no music would be played during my MRI. I was given the earplugs and protection. And once my ears were protected, then a cage was placed across my head. And at this point, I just closed my eyes before being pushed way back in that tunnel. I was also given a rubber squeeze ball, which was my panic call button. The first part of the MRI was without contrast, although before I even went into the MRI, an IV was inserted into my left arm. The first part of the MRI, it took about 30 to 40 minutes, and I just kept telling myself to just relax, keep my eyes closed. I also tried to associate the loud banging noises of the machine with like alternative metal bands like Tool and Soundgarden. I mean, you got to do what you can to keep still for so long in such a tight space. The second part of the MRI was with contrast. So they injected a metal element into my IV, and they told me that it would take like a day or two for this element to exit my body. I didn't feel anything going in, but I had that metallic taste in my mouth, similar to when he flushed the IV with saline to begin with. So this part of the MRI, it only lasted about 8 minutes. And when he said we were done and I started to move out of that tunnel, that's when I opened my eyes and I saw just how close I was to the machine. Had I kept my eyes open throughout, I surely would have hit that panic ball he placed in my right hand. The MRI results, they didn't come in until I was actually in the lobby at the ENT waiting to be called for my follow-up visit to go over the test results of the V&G. The MRI findings show no neurological abnormalities, no masses, nothing wrong with my brainstem, no hemorrhage, normal gray and white matter. My sinuses were well aerated. The only thing that it did show that really isn't of concern is something I've had since birth, which is, and I quote, a small developmental venous anomaly within the right thalamus, or a DVA. So it's rare, but it's benign. It's how the small veins in my brain form during development. There's no symptoms or treatment, and up to 10% of the general population has this condition. But the MRI did rule out something that the ENT had not spoken to me about before, and that was a stroke. He said the MRI did not show any signs of a stroke, which is something that had crossed the minds of my husband and I. So what's causing the vertigo? Well, the caloric testing, where they put the cold and the warm air into my ears, they showed vestibular weakness in my right ear. That surprised me because it was my left ear that made me feel very nauseous when they put the warm air into it. However, reading up on this, it was my right ear that had the weaker response to the cold and warm stimuli. So I finally had a diagnosis as to what's causing this vertigo. So what's the cure? There isn't any. Vestibular neuritis is caused by a viral infection, and the damage is done to my inner ear. A common cold, the flu, and my immediate thought, which I asked my ENT about, was COVID. My husband and I managed not to get COVID until I went on a business trip to California last September. I hadn't gotten a booster vaccination before I went, and I didn't wear a mask. Don and I did get boosters before we went to Cancun. When I asked the ENT if he had seen more cases of vestibular weakness from COVID and if there was a correlation, he said yes, but there wasn't evidence or studies to show that the two were connected. But he did agree that COVID could have been the culprit. Okay, so if there's no cure, then what's next? The ENT said all I can do is manage my symptoms. I could go to physical therapy to try and retrain my brain to help with my balance. He also said that if things got really bad, he could put me on antiviral meds, which I'd be on pretty much for the rest of my life. I did mention to him the changes that I recently made, which included giving up all caffeine except for chocolate, lowering my sodium intake, taking vitamin D3, and I cut out all alcohol. I also stopped taking all of the meds that my PCP prescribed, including the hormones and the joint pain meds and my blood pressure meds. The ENT, he said that the dietary changes that I made were good and to keep doing that. And had this been a vestibular migraine related diagnosis, those things would definitely have helped along with medication. But since this is basically damage to my inner ear, physical therapy is the next step in trying to manage my symptoms. I have noticed that since I've made the dietary changes and I've stopped the meds, that I have only had bouts of wobbles rather than full-on attacks. And it's been a couple of weeks since I had a serious vertigo incident. And I will be checking into physical therapy to help right-size this ship. I also appreciate those that have reached out to me to tell me about their similar experiences with vertigo. Thank you for your kind emails, your recommendations, and your comments. I really, really do appreciate that. And thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel. Doing so helps YouTube show this video to more people who may be suffering from vertigo as well. Until next time, hasta luego, my friends.